You can hear the city breathing outside your window. It's late. The bells have long since marked curfew. The streets gone dim beneath the glow of half-burnt torches. Somewhere, a lute plays a lazy tune, and laughter drifts through the shutters before being swallowed by the cold. It's the 14th century, and you are still awake. Your room smells faintly of wine and beeswax. The candlelight dances across a wooden table where a single silver coin lies waiting. A payment, a promise, or perhaps the price of another long night. Down below, the alleys twist like veins through the city. The nobles sleep behind thick doors, the priests whisper in cloisters, and the watchmen trade stories to keep from freezing. But here, in this quiet room above a tavern, another world begins. One of painted faces, soft laughter, and the kind of power that can only exist in the shadows. Here's the thing. History remembers its kings, its bishops, its saints, but rarely the women who kept the world turning behind closed doors. Tonight, we'll walk with one of them, not as a ghost, not as a scandal, but as a living soul of her time, a woman navigating a world that judged her as much as it relied on her. But before you settle in, make sure you're comfortable. Turn on the fan if you need to. Pull the blankets close and let yourself sink into the quiet. And if you'd like to keep traveling with me through history, do well to like this video and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. You can also tell me which period of history you'd love to hear next. I always read through your ideas. Now, with the world growing still, let's begin our journey.
Let's begin with a simple truth. Nobody plans to end up in a brothel. Not in medieval London, not anywhere. But life in the 14th century didn't care much for plans. Maybe you were a farmer's daughter whose father lost the harvest. Maybe you followed a man to the city and he vanished the moment your shoes hit the mud. Or maybe you were just tired of scrubbing some noblewoman's chamber pot for half a penny a week. Whatever the story, somehow you found yourself in Southwark, the city's unofficial district of good times and bad choices. You wouldn't call it glamorous. The streets were cramped, the air smelled of fish, and the houses leaned like old men who'd given up standing straight. But Southwark was alive, full of music, fights, laughter, and sin, all sharing a pint together. And that's where your story begins. You rent a room in one of the stews. That's what they called brothels then, as if giving them a kitchen name made them respectable. A woman named Agnes runs the place. She's sharp as a blade and twice as quick with her tongue. You pay her a share of your earnings, and in return, she keeps you safe. Well, safe enough. The first thing you learn is that this job isn't just about sex. It's theater. You become whatever the customer wants you to be. A lost maiden, a daring flirt, a quiet listener. You learn to read faces faster than priests read scripture. You also learn what men are really like once the wine's gone. Some are kind, some are cruel, and most are just lonely. A few even ask your advice about their wives, which is rich, considering where they are. By daylight, you try to keep your dignity together with the same pins that hold up your dress. You might go to the market for bread, share gossip with the washerwomen, or visit the apothecary who swears he can cure women's ailments with dried toad and wine. You smile, you nod, and you save every coin you can, because no one stays in this trade forever, not if they can help it. Here's the thing, though. Despite the filth and danger, there's a strange kind of sisterhood here. The women look out for one another. You share laughter when you can, food when you must, and secrets you'd never tell a priest. And when night falls again and the candles flicker in the windows, the streets outside hum with footsteps and laughter. Men call softly through the dark, coins clinking in their hands. You take a deep breath, fix your hair, and step behind the curtain, back into the role the world has written for you. But you're not just a sinner in someone's sermon. You're a survivor. You're making a life in a city that offers precious few ways for a woman to live at all. So when people judge you, you smile to yourself, because they'll never know the truth. You've seen more of human nature than most saints ever will.
The morning comes too early in this city. You'd think the streets of medieval London would stay quiet till the church bells call the faithful, but no. Someone's always shouting, a cart's always clattering, and the air smells like a mix of yesterday's ale and something you don't want to identify. If you're one of the women of Southwark, down by the stews, you wake up not to birdsong, but to the sound of boots in the mud and the creak of shutters. You stretch, pull your hair out of your face, and try not to think about how thin the wall is between your room and the next. The woman next door coughs, a wet, deep cough that hasn't gone away for months. And somewhere in the hallway, a man's voice grumbles for his boots. Here's the thing. Being a prostitute in medieval London wasn't a scandal. It was a business. A tolerated one, so long as you stayed on the right side of the Thames. Southwark was London's shadow. The church and crown both pretended to frown on sin, yet they owned half the land your brothel stood on. Hypocrisy had a parish all to itself. You might start your day with a quick wash in cold water, quick being the key word since hot water costs money, and maybe a bite of stale bread dipped in watered-down wine. You check your reflection in a dull bit of metal, fix your hair, and make yourself look just decent enough for men who, frankly, aren't paying for decency. Some days are slow. You sit on the steps, gossip with the other girls, and watch the city's rhythm. Sailors swagger by, monks pretend they've lost their way, and a few husbands mutter excuses before ducking inside. You learn faces. You learn who to smile at, who to ignore, and who to avoid altogether. When work begins, it's not glamorous, but it's routine. You survive on charm, quick wit, and the unspoken rule that you're not just selling your body, you're selling a few moments of illusion. You make men feel powerful, interesting, wanted. It's strange work, really. You listen more than you speak. You learn the secrets of merchants, soldiers, priests. Some tell you things that would turn a confession box cold. And through it all, you keep your humor alive, because that's what gets you through. You joke about the bishop's son who couldn't find his way out of his own trousers. You laugh at the man who fell asleep mid-act and snored loud enough to wake the rats. You tease your friends and share a sip of cider when the night's done. Then, when the candles burn low and the streets fall quiet again, you sit by the window, looking out at the river's black water. You wonder how long you'll do this, how long you can. You think about the nuns in the convent across the city whispering prayers at this same hour. Two women, both awake in the dark, each living in her own kind of confinement. That's the rhythm of your days and nights. Work, laughter, survival. The world looks down on you, yet depends on you more than it dares to admit. And when morning comes again, you'll rise to the same bells, the same noise, and start over. Because in medieval London, sin paid the rent, and the rent was always due.
Here's the funny thing about medieval morality. It had a terrible sense of direction. The church preached purity from the pulpit every Sunday morning, then collected rent from the very brothels it condemned by night. And Southwark, where our story lives and breathes, was practically church-owned real estate. You could stand on the corner outside your stew house, look up, and see the cross of St. Mary Overy shining above you. The monks inside prayed for your soul while, just a few doors down, one of their novices tried to negotiate a confession of a different kind. Officially, the church despised prostitution. Unofficially, it tolerated it as the lesser evil. Better, they said, that men visit the stews than chase respectable wives and daughters. That was the logic. Sin in moderation, like wine. So long as it didn't spill into the streets, the bishops could sleep at night. Every once in a while, a priest would show up at your door with a face full of fire and righteousness. He'd thunder about repentance and the fires of damnation, and Agnes, the madam, would nod politely, offer him a cup of ale, and ask if he wanted to preach to the girls or with them. Most didn't stay long. The church's relationship with the brothels was a bit like a guilty marriage. Too profitable to end, too shameful to admit. And let's not forget the local authorities. The Bishop of Winchester himself licensed many of Southwark's stews, which is why the women who worked there were mockingly called Winchester geese. It was both insult and badge of survival. You might even have to pay your sin tax directly to the bishop's men. Imagine that. Handing over your hard-earned coins to fund the very sermons that call you wicked. Still, you found humor in it all. The girls used to joke that every time the bells rang for Mass, one of them should curtsy. They were practically paying the choir's wages anyway. There were other odd contradictions, too. If a girl fell ill, sometimes a nun from the nearby hospital would come to tend her wounds. They'd never say where she came from, never judge, just dab her forehead with clean cloth and whisper prayers. Two women on opposite ends of virtue, both caught in a world run by men and their appetites. And on rare nights, when the moon was high and the streets quieted, you'd hear singing from the church, soft, haunting hymns carried over the river's mist. You'd stop what you were doing, just for a moment, and listen. The sound reminded you that even in this crooked city, beauty still existed. You'd close your eyes, whisper your own small prayer, nothing grand, nothing rehearsed, and then go back to life as it was. Because holiness was for Sundays. Survival was for every other day of the week.
If you want to understand what love meant to a medieval prostitute, forget everything you've learned from courtly romances. There were no nights with flowers, no poetry whispered under moonlight, just men who smelled like ale and horses, and the faint hope that one of them might be kind enough to stay. Love, for you, was a dangerous luxury. You saw what it did to other girls. It made them softer, distracted, easier to cheat or hurt. And yet, every once in a while, you'd meet someone who made you forget what you were. Maybe it was a soldier with kind eyes and too many scars. Maybe a young scribe who paid just to talk, who treated you like a person instead of a pastime. Those were the dangerous ones, the ones who asked your real name. You'd laugh, dodge the question, and call yourself Rose or Anne or whatever he wanted to hear, because your real name was something private, something from before all this. Still, sometimes when you were sitting with him after the noise had died down, you'd let yourself pretend that this room wasn't rented by the hour. Pretend you weren't calculating how much you'd earn by morning. Pretend you were just two people trying to stay warm in a cold world. But reality had no patience for daydreams. Illness was never far away. The stew sickness came often. Sores, fever, pain that made every breath a punishment. Some called it God's curse, but the truth was simpler. No clean water, no medicine, and no mercy. When a girl caught the pox, everyone knew. Agnes would move her to a small, dark room at the back. The laughter outside would keep going, but it never reached her door again. You'd visit sometimes, bring a bit of broth, or sit quietly beside her when she couldn't speak anymore. Nobody deserved to die alone. And when the bell finally tolled, the rest of you would cross yourselves, mutter a prayer, and keep working. Because life didn't stop for grief, not down here. There were good days too, of course. Market days when sailors spent their coin freely. Feast days when everyone got drunk enough to forget their sins. You'd dance in the street, barefoot, hair unbound, just because you could. You were poor, yes, but you were alive, and that counted for something. And through it all, your body became both your prison and your weapon. You learned how to protect it, how to read danger in a man's eyes before he said a word. You learned to laugh in the face of insults, to bluff through fear, to hide pain behind painted lips. Love, illness, survival, they were all the same thing in the end. Small acts of endurance. And on the nights when you lay awake, listening to the river's slow murmur, you'd think about the life you might have had if the world had been just a little fairer. Then you'd turn over, pull the blanket close, and let sleep take you before the morning bells began their accusing song again.
It never happens all at once. The fall, I mean. One day you're still turning heads in the candlelight, still earning enough to keep Agnes happy and your stomach full. Then suddenly the mirror shows you a face that looks tired. Not old, exactly, but worn in a way no paint can hide. The younger girls have taken your corner. They laugh louder, flirt faster, and don't yet know the price of all that laughter. You don't blame them. Once you were them, and they'll be you soon enough. That's just how Southwark works. New faces in, old faces out. You start thinking about leaving long before you actually do. Maybe you dream of setting up a small alehouse somewhere, or marrying a baker who doesn't drink too much and smells faintly of flour instead of sweat. You imagine yourself respectable, whatever that means. But dreams need coin, and coin still comes from the same place. So you keep at it a little longer, promising yourself just one more season. Then one day you catch a fever that doesn't leave. Agnes tries her usual remedies, garlic wine, prayers, and scolding, but nothing works. You're moved to the quiet room at the back, the one you visited too many times before. You know what it means. And here's the strange thing. You're not angry, just tired. You lie there, listening to the city beyond the walls. Somewhere, a cart rattles over the cobblestones, a dog barks. The bells of St. Mary Overy toll the hour, as if the world is reminding you that time never stops, even when you do. Your friend Joan sneaks in to see you. She jokes that if she dies, she's stealing your shawl. You laugh weakly. "Take it," you say, "but it won't make you prettier." She rolls her eyes, wipes them quickly, and says she'll light a candle for you. You tell her not to waste good wax. When she leaves, you think about all the people who passed through your life. Men whose names you never learned, girls who came and went like summer rain, the priest who preached against sin but always winked at you on market days. It's a ridiculous, tragic, beautiful mess of a life. And it's yours. Maybe you were never a saint. Maybe the poets will never write about you, but you lived fully, fiercely, and on your own terms in a world that gave women almost none. And when the fever finally breaks you, the other girls gather what they can to bury you. Nothing fancy, a wooden box, a patch of earth, a whispered prayer. But that night, they raise a cup in your name. Even Agnes drinks. She had a sharp tongue and a good heart. God help whichever angel meets her first. Somewhere, maybe, that angel laughs. And the river keeps flowing, the candles keep burning, and the city hums on, same as it ever was. Another girl takes your room, pulls the curtain closed, and life begins again.
And so her story fades into the hush of time. No one wrote her name in the city records. No poet sang her sorrow. But she lived, fully, stubbornly, against the current of her age. She was one of countless women who made medieval London run, quietly, in the shadows. Women who knew the price of survival and paid it without complaint. They weren't saints, but they were honest, in a way the saints never were. History tends to look away from them. It prefers queens and crusaders, monks and kings. Yet, if you listen closely, beneath all the noise of battles and sermons, you can still hear the softer stories. The laughter in a darkened room, the quiet courage of those who made their own way when the world gave them none. Maybe that's what this really is, not a tale of sin, but of endurance, of women who found meaning, humor, even moments of tenderness in a world that thought them disposable. And perhaps that's the real miracle. Not redemption, not glory, just survival and the small dignity of being remembered, even if only for a moment tonight.
Now, this is one of those customs that sounds like a bad tavern story, but it was very real. In parts of medieval Europe, marriage wasn't truly complete until the couple had consummated it. And believe it or not, the community sometimes made sure that happened. Publicly. Picture this. After the wedding feast, with everyone happily drunk on ale and goodwill, the newlyweds are escorted to their bedchamber, not in privacy, but in procession. The guests sing bawdy songs, carry torches, and sometimes throw coins or bits of grain for luck. The air smells of sweat, candles, and far too much mead. The bride and groom are brought to the marriage bed, often under the approving eyes of family, clergy, and a few too curious neighbors. A priest might bless the bed, sprinkle holy water, and recite prayers. Yes, prayers for fertility. Then the couple are tucked in by their witnesses. Sometimes the curtains are drawn, and everyone finally leaves. Other times, the crowd lingers longer than decency allows. You can imagine how romantic that must have been. Of course, not every region practiced it so bluntly. In many places, it was more symbolic, a procession to the bed, a blessing, maybe a quick kiss before the doors closed. The witnesses were there to confirm the marriage was official, not necessarily to see it through to the end. But the idea remained. Love wasn't private. It was a social contract, sealed not by words, but by action. For the bride, it could be terrifying. Many were young, often strangers to their new husbands, and the pressure of performance, religious, social, physical, hung heavy. For the groom, it was just as tense. Imagine your entire future depending on whether you could, quite literally, prove yourself in front of half the village. Still, the bedding ceremony wasn't all humiliation. It was also community reassurance. Marriage joined families, secured alliances, and, at least in theory, ensured legitimate heirs. What we'd call invasive, they called tradition. And in that candlelit room, after the laughter faded and the doors shut, the world outside waited to celebrate a new household, a new beginning. The bedding ceremony, strange as it was, marked that fragile, awkward threshold between innocence and experience, between being part of your family and creating one of your own. History can be indecently human sometimes, but that's what makes it real.
If you think modern birth control methods are unreliable, spare a thought for medieval women. They had beliefs, not science, and those beliefs were creative, to put it kindly. For starters, people genuinely thought you could prevent pregnancy by sneezing. Yes, sneezing. Right after the act, of course. Midwives would advise women to jump up and down, cough loudly, and hope the body expelled the seed. It was more of a workout than a method. Others swore by charms, tiny scrolls with Latin prayers or nonsense words tied around the thigh. A few believed carrying a piece of coral, a weasel bone, or dried rabbit foot could do the trick. One poor woman was told to wear a necklace made from eel skin. Another rubbed her belly with olive oil, vinegar, or, believe it or not, beeswax. Then there were herbal remedies. Some worked, many didn't, and most would probably get you a visit from the apothecary's ghost. Pennyroyal, for instance, was a common choice. It could disrupt pregnancy, but it was also highly toxic. One sip too much, and you'd prevent pregnancy forever. In brothels, the women relied on what little they had, washing with vinegar or wine, certain herbs, or simply hoping for luck. It wasn't foolproof, but then again, neither were the men. The church, of course, condemned it all. Every charm, potion, or whispered recipe was labeled witchcraft. But that didn't stop anyone. Medieval women, especially prostitutes, were pragmatists. They weren't rebelling against God. They were just trying to survive another day without another mouth to feed. And when all else failed, well, there was always prayer. Though even the saints, one suspects, sighed at the request.
Now, you could always tell a brothel woman by her clothes, not because they were scandalous, but because the law made them so. Cities across Europe forced prostitutes to dress differently, the medieval version of a neon sign that said, "Not respectable." In London, many were required to wear striped hoods, bright red and white, like a warning flag you could spot across the street. In Florence, it was yellow veils. In some German towns, it was green shoes. The logic was that a good Christian man should be able to avoid temptation. Of course, most used it as a map instead. Inside the stews, though, the women turned those symbols into something of their own. They embroidered the edges, added ribbons, made their hoods prettier than the law intended, a bit of defiance in thread and color. Their dresses were second-hand, cast-offs from noblewomen or merchants' wives, but with clever stitching, they turned rags into something resembling dignity. They'd paint their lips with crushed berries, scent their hair with herbs, and wear pewter rings as if they were gold. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. And jewelry told its own story. A heart-shaped brooch might mean she had a favored lover. A cross on her wrist might mean she still prayed every night. Some even wore tiny glass beads filled with perfume to mask the smell of smoke and ale. It was a strange kind of elegance, not born from wealth, but from survival. So yes, you could say brothel women were among the first to practice statement fashion, not for the runway, but for the muddy lanes of Southwark. And every stitch whispered the same thing. The world may own my body, but it will never own my style. When you step back and look at it all, the brothel rooms, the church bells, the strange customs, the laughter, the sickness, and the stubborn life that pulsed through it, you start to see the truth. The story of a medieval prostitute isn't just one woman's fall from grace. It's a mirror held up to the entire age. She lived in the cracks of history, between the sermons and the streets, between what people pretended to believe and what they actually did. The church condemned her, the city taxed her, and the men who visited her swore she didn't exist the moment they stepped outside. Yet somehow, she still managed to laugh, to gossip, to share bread and secrets with the only people who understood her. The smaller pieces of her world, the bedding ceremony, the charms and herbs, the striped hoods and green shoes, They fill in the color between the shadows. They remind us that history wasn't neat. It was noisy, contradictory, and often ridiculous. Holy men renting out sin, town councils legislating lust, women turning mockery into fashion statements. It's tempting to pity her, but maybe that's not the right emotion. She doesn't need pity. She deserves understanding. She found humor in the hypocrisy, courage in her choices, and meaning in a life most people pretended not to see. And what this really shows us is how human history truly is: messy, unfiltered, and far too complex for easy judgment. Behind every sermon and statute, there was someone just trying to survive. Someone washing with vinegar and hope, tying a ribbon to feel pretty, or saying a quiet prayer even as the world called her lost. So tonight, as the lanterns of South Ark fade and the river carries their reflection away, think of her, not as a sinner, but as a soul who lived with grit and grace in a world that gave her neither. Because history isn't made only by kings and knights. Sometimes it's written in laughter behind a thin wooden door, in the rustle of a striped hood, or in the soft, unrecorded heartbeat of a woman who refused to vanish. And now, with the noise of the city fading, take a breath. Let the story rest beside you. The bells are distant, the candles are low, and the world, finally, is still. Sleep well, traveler. You've seen more of medieval life than most priests dared to imagine.